This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the HP Envy X360 13-inch, or the 13Z model specifically. HP's been doing great things with the Envy, and it gets even better, in part because we have the new AMD Ryzen 4000 series CPU inside, otherwise known as Zen 2 or Renoir. Very fast, excellent performance there, and keeps the price reasonable. But beyond that, they've done a redesign, just like they did with the Spectre X360 last year. So this distance over here is over 17 millimeters shorter, and that reduces the bottom chin bezel that used to be kind of large. Beyond that, you've got a metal casing. They call this Nightfall Black, all aluminum casing. Nice full HD display options. We're going to look at it now. But now, a shout out to our sponsor, Trend Micro, and their home network security device. This thing's just a little over $100, and it's really easy to set up. Just plug in the included Ethernet cable into your router, plug it into power, and it does more than just firewalling, though it is a firewall too. It protects your Internet of Things devices, so that means all the smart devices that you have, your Ring doorbells, your Alexa this and that, your robotic vacuum cleaner, all that stuff. It's going to protect it. It's going to make sure that nobody tries to hack in. Also, it has parental control, so this is great for family management, especially with kids being at home so much right now. It can check to make sure they're not using apps that they shouldn't be using, and also it can set timers. So basically, 10 o'clock at night, no more YouTube for you. You get the idea there. And it also blocks malicious files and malicious websites too. So, and again, very easy to manage. Android, Apple smartphone, it doesn't matter. Both of those are going to work just fine. And as another bonus, it also protects your router, which is pretty good because your ISP throws a router at you and never updates it again. Now, back to our video. So this is one heck of a tiny 13.3-inch Ultrabook. I tell you, HP and Dell are just in a battle with the XPS line, you know, versus the Envy and the Spectre as to who can make the smallest one. They say it's the footprint of your old school 11-inch laptop, and they're not lying. It looks tiny. It's also very attractive looking. Given the price tag, that's pretty darn nice. You actually get an aluminum casing here in what that nice black, and you get a full HD IPS display. That's the only display option, and that's fair because our model, nicely equipped, it's got the Ryzen 5 inside, and it's got 8 gigs of RAM and a 256 gig SSD, is selling for around $769, and it looks very premium, so good that. Now, if you want to spend even less, there is a Ryzen 3, and Ryzen's kind of try to parallel Intel Core i3, i5, and i7 with their nomenclature. And that one has 8 gigs of RAM and only 128 gig SSD. I would go up to the Ryzen 5 if you can afford it. It's not too much of a big jump in price. You could go up to a Ryzen 7, 16 gigs of RAM is the max. And you can even go up to a 1 terabyte SSD if you want. Regardless of which one, you're going to get an M.2 NVMe SSD with reasonable good speed. So that's a lot of niceness for the price here. So HP is really kind of almost threatening their own Spectre X360 line here because you're getting the metal chassis and all that sort of thing. But for those of you who want some of the added niceties, like a 4K display, for example, or Thunderbolt 3, then the Spectre is still there for you, not to mention that edgy design, which is pretty cool looking on it. The display supports pen and touch. The pen is not in the box here. It's Microsoft Pen Protocol 2.0, otherwise known as n-trig. So you can get HP's pen. These days they're selling one that's USB-C rechargeable. You could use a Microsoft Surface Pro pen as well with it if you wanted to. They build this more for note-taking, and that's appropriate. n-trig is a little less smooth when it comes to things like diagonal line jitter and all that stuff that artists care about. It's fine for note-taking, and the palm rejection is pretty good these days. Obviously, there are 360-degree hinges here because this is a convertible Ultrabook. And for those of you who like all this but want a 15-inch laptop, they actually make it in the 15-inch size too, with similar specs and similar pricing. Some other niceties are a webcam privacy switch. There's a fingerprint scanner in the keyboard. The power button is right next to the delete key on the keyboard. That, to me, is not the most brilliant decision, but hey. And they have a quick launch button for the HP Command Center, which you'll mostly use for the thermal profiles. There's their version of optimized or balanced. There's a high performance mode, which in our test didn't make actually that much of a difference, and a couple of super quiet kind of settings. Now, the star here is going to be this year's AMD Ryzen 4000 series CPUs. So we have the Ryzen U series Ultrabook 15-watt CPUs with AMD Radeon Vega 8 graphics, which are about like Intel Iris Plus graphics or G7 graphics. So you don't have to go for the highest end Core i7 in Intel land just to get that kind of similar graphics performance here for less money. Nice that. We have the Ryzen 5 4500U, and this is a good performer. It benchmarks closer to an Intel Core i7 10th gen. Very nice. And the other good thing about the Ryzen is that the performance in terms of thermals, the heat, and the battery life are also excellent, which is new for Ryzen CPUs for this generation. Finally, they got there and they did a good job of it. So when running benchmarks and doing more demanding tasks like handbrake, video encodes, and all that sort of thing, CPU temperatures typically maxed out around 85 centigrade, whereas Intel we'd see more like 95 centigrade. So that's good. The cooling here is not quite as effective as it is on the Lenovo IdeaPad Flex 5 we recently reviewed with the same CPU, but that's a 14-inch chassis, bigger laptop, a little more room for cooling, and I wouldn't make my buying decision on that because this one's still running cool enough. The improved thermals here versus Intel also mean you're going to hear the fan a lot less often. If you push it hard, you'll hear it. Ultrabook fan, you know, that shh, not a roaring or anything like that. I don't think most people would be bothered by it. It is thin, it is metal. I didn't find that it got hot to the touch, though. The U-series CPUs are 15 watt. They're not the super powerful mobile workstation style CPU, so I didn't find any burning hot spots on the laptop, even when doing things like benchmarking. So, good that. In terms of ports, you've got USB-A ports, you've got your micro SD card slot, skinny laptop here, and the USB-A ports are what they call drop jaw, little drop down hinges on them because it's too thin to just fit the USB-A port without doing that. And we have USB-C, and that is Gen 2. It supports DisplayPort and it supports power delivery, though this comes with a barrel pin charger. You could use a USB-C charger if you wanted. So no Thunderbolt 3 here, in part because Thunderbolt 3 was Intel's intellectual property. Now it's opening up. In the future we'll probably see with AMD, but given the price, you don't expect to see Thunderbolt 3 in something that's selling for $650 or $769. You can use USB-C docks, so that's a go. In terms of display, no matter what you go with here, they have three options. You're still going to get full HD IPS, and it's going to support the pen and touch. Now, they have the 300 nit, which we haven't seen in person, the 400 nit, which is the one that we have, which really goes way over 400 nits. It's nice to see this happening with manufacturers exceeding their claims. And there's also a 1000 nit privacy display, which we've seen on the HP Spectre series. It gets mostly very bright to deal with the privacy screen functionality on it, so yeah. It's a good display, honestly. Here we have full sRGB coverage, which is nice to see, and we have better than average contrast ratio. You can see the specs on screen. It's reasonably well calibrated from the factory, too. It's a pleasant enough screen, and it's a color accurate enough screen that it's enjoyable. As ever with HP laptops, though, boy, is it glossy. Plenty of reflection and glare. The keyboard on this is backlit in white. You have two levels of backlighting, and it doesn't have a lot of travel. It's a super skinny laptop. It's okay, though. The tactile feel on this is pretty good, and as we all get adjusted to these lower travel keyboards, it's fine. It's not weirdo short travel, just average short travel keyboard. We have a Microsoft Precision Trackpad on board. It behaves perfectly well. It's a slightly rough surface. You can actually hear your finger going across it like a little ch-ch-ch. I like that. It gives you traction so you're not like skating across the trackpad. It works fine. We have stereo Bang & Olufsen branded speakers here with HP's software to amp up the sound. And given how tiny this thing is, it actually has some bass, which is impressive, and plenty of volume on board. This is a 51 watt-hour battery, which is a good size capacity battery here, and it comes with a 65 watt fast charger that can charge it up to 50% in 30 minutes. Again, it's the barrel pin kind of connector. You could use a USB charger if you wanted to. HP claims almost 12 hours for Netflix streaming and almost 13 hours for web browsing, and that's with the brightness set to 150 nits. And as always, a little optimistic there, and with web browsing, they mean Edge, not Chrome, which is more resource intensive. They mean a few tabs open and not 25 tabs open in your web browser. But I found on average that we were managing 9 to 10 hours on a charge. That's really good. And Ryzen is really leading the way here with some reduced power consumption and good performance. So what about this versus the Lenovo IdeaPad Flex 5, its most direct competitor? The Lenovo is a 14-inch laptop versus this being a 13.3-inch, so in part that does depend on your preferred screen size. Not that there's a huge difference. Both have full HD displays, both have the same Ryzen CPU options, but the display on the HP is much better, much wider color gamut, full sRGB versus only 65%. of sRGB. Also higher contrast, so that stands in its favor. I like the Lenovo keyboard feel a little bit better, but I like the looks of the Envy better, and the fact that it has an aluminum casing on it, whereas the Lenovo's is plastic. So this one just feels more classy and looks a little prettier to my eye. Not that looks are everything, but they influence us all. Now here's something that I always consider a negative with HP's consumer laptops, the skinny ones like the Spectre x360 and this Envy. They call them not user serviceable. What that really means is you have to pull off the rubber strips on the bottom, and the adhesive is kind of cranky. You might not get it back on there again to access the screws that hold the bottom plate on. I'm not going to bother opening this one up, mostly because like all Ultrabooks, the RAM is soldered on. The only thing you can replace is the M.2 SSD if you want to put a bigger one in or a faster one in. And the Wi-Fi card is socketed. But since it's an Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX200 card, which is a very good card, you probably are not going to want to replace that. So that's the HP Envy x360 13-inch model with AMD inside. It's hard to find anything to complain about given the price of this laptop. You get a metal chassis. You get quite a pleasing IPS display here, at least with our 400 nit model. Haven't seen the 300 nit in person to say. A good, decent keyboard on a very nice trackpad. Performance that's excellent. A design that's very yummy. Yes, you don't get Thunderbolt 3, and in part that has to do with AMD, but really mostly it has to do with the price. If you want Thunderbolt 3, there's the next jump up, which is the Spectre x360, their most premium model. Very nice overall. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos, and thumbs up if you like this vid.